One of the most common questions I got when I was streaming this expansion was, what's my preferred comp for pugging, especially alongside Blood DK? What are the classes and specs I'd like to see in those dungeons? And I was thinking a lot about this question because I wanted to start making new videos to help people finish up Keystone Master for Battle for Azeroth Season 4, especially now that the PTR has the pre-patch. That means your time is limited. You only have a few weeks left. And especially if you're pugging and new to Mythic Plus, I feel like this info can actually really make a big difference. It might sound minor at first, but you'd be surprised at how important having the right comp is, not just the right players. Now, this is purely for pugging, and realistically, you know, even though I'm doing 20s and 21s, I feel like this is actually probably more important in a disorganized 15, where the dungeon, especially like the timer and the DPS requirement, is lower, but you still need good, you know, mechanical. You need to be sound mechanically. You can't have 40 deaths and expect to upgrade it. Maybe you can, but realistically, you'll want to be sound mechanically to give yourself the highest chance of success. So I'm going to talk a little bit about every class and what I believe to be an ideal comp for me as a Blood DK. And we'll also talk a little bit about tanks for those who are out there pugging as non-DK. But if you are new, you're trying to get this done last minute, basically, I have a lot of videos in this new player playlist, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. Should be all over the channel by now. And if there's any questions you need or any help specifically, let me know. I'm happy to help. I want everybody to get as much out of this expansion as they can, even down to the wire here. So but don't get carried, you know what I mean? Be the best you can be and use the info out there to help you. So I'm gonna actually show you something that I think is the pinnacle of using the info that's out there, and I feel like a lot of people might be surprised to see this, but this is a spreadsheet I made with every single run I did in Season 4. So as you see, goes back quite a ways, all the way back to March actually. Early ones are a little out of date there, actually January, yeah. So goes all the way back to the beginning. And we have 537 runs here, so you can use this. It's in the description. You can use the filters and everything to see by dungeon. I would recommend, you know, even if you want to see like a specific dungeon, or even if you just want to see, well, I'm not pugging, I have a specific comp. It's not a great comp. We got like 4 Shadow Priests. Let me know. You could go see runs with Shadow Priests. You know, you use a filter to see only runs with priests in it instead of runs without priests, which is like 7. And and then you could see what the Shadow Priest did. You could look the person up, maybe even talk to them. So stuff like that. I think this is a really, really, really good tool. And I don't think a lot of people in the community are doing stuff like this, so I'm happy to provide it. But let's talk a little bit about every single slot. Now, if you look through this quickly, you're going to see one comp that you're going to see a lot appear here. And it's this one right here. Demon Hunter, Hunter, Mage, okay? And, you know, besides healer and tank, I feel like this is one of the most common 3 DPS comps. Now, you could also have multiple hunters, multiple demon hunters. We see that a lot. In fact, you're going to see the odd triple hunter, double hunter, etc. a lot in this. You could just add it up here. You'll see freaking 304 hunters across however many, 500 and some keys. So pretty crazy. They're very popular right now. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about this comp real quick and why I do think it's a strong comp overall, and one that you're going to see a lot, especially if you're not putting the group together. The reason right now is because all 3 of those classes are very flashy, and they're pretty attractive for your average Mythic Plus player. Demon Hunter is easily probably the most applicable in this way. They have so much access to between bulk, self-healing, utility, AoE stuns. They got some slows, they got some, you know, they pretty much have everything you want in a Mythic Plus pick. And they're frankly really easy to play. You know, not easy to maximize, no class is, but Demon Hunter is definitely a spec that can be picked up, and you know, you can get pretty damn close to maximizing it within a couple hours of play. So the gear and all that will come. But yeah, if you ever see a Demon Hunter, this is what you're thinking about, because you know that the class is relatively easy to play. And especially at this point, they should be geared enough that the weaknesses of an under-skilled Demon Hunter won't be as obvious. And that's the problem that I find with Hunter all the time. Hunter is a little bit different in that way, that it's become really, really popular recently, because especially with the MDI, most groups running 2 to 3 Hunters, and the way the spec works with corruption, Beast Mastery Hunter works with Corruption, it's become like the go-to pick for anybody who's on the fence about what they're playing right now. And it's easily the most accessible ranged. I mean, they're the only range in the game that can do their full damage while moving, so they're basically a melee at ranged. And you know, the pet and some other things really blend things in. You know, like you have a lot of potential errors that you could make, and you won't be punished for them. Now, one thing about Hunter, though, unfortunately, is they lack the bulk and self-sustain of Demon Hunter. They're not bad, they're good, above average, but you will see that this is the problem with pugging Hunters right now, is that a lot of them are playing maybe Hunter for the first season, or maybe even the first few weeks. I would always look at how many keys these people have completed, first of all, when you're pugging with them. You can see that on the Raider.io add-on. But yeah, if you've seen like under double digits, then I would definitely stay away, because that means somebody's probably just switched, and I wouldn't want to play with the person playing a Hunter in that case, because even though the class is very open and the spec is very easy to play and accessible, I think a lot of people don't use the things that Hunter do well. They don't use them very well at all. In fact, you'll see in a lot of these, if you look at a lot of these recent keys, you'll see a lot of Hunters just derping around with their mobility and their position. They'll disengage into a patrol, or they'll be standing in the wrong spot when the mechanics come out, complicating the fight. And these are the kind of things that Hunter have to do well. Otherwise, they're not better than any other class in the game, even if they theoretically might do more damage than them. If they're constantly messing around, pulling trash, dying, not using their class well, then just bring a Demon Hunter. You know what I mean? They're going to be better in every way. And then Mage in that pick is really, really hot right now, because fire is like so explosive. I don't know what it might look like on the lower end, but in high keys, yeah, you could see a good fire mage do, you know, like 500+ on a medium-sized pack, and that has a big delete potential. The problem is a lot of fire mages don't know how to play after that. Outside of combustion, they just don't know what to do, and they expect the tank to be, basically babysitting their CDs, which, as a blood DK, I will never be doing. I need my CDs more than they need theirs. Unfortunately, you know, I need my CDs more than I need their CDs. Let's put it that way. So, but anyway, let's go through every class, and we'll talk a little bit about what I believe to be the ideal comp. That's a comp that you're going to see a lot. I wouldn't say it's the ideal comp for 15. Okay, so we're going to just start. I might as well just start at the top here, so you can see. So Death Knight first on this list. Not a lot of DKs. You're not going to see a lot of them this season, but it's become a little bit more popular recently. People have been talking a lot about Frost DK, but Unholy and Frost I believe to be very powerful offensively. Unfortunately, they just don't really bring much outside of that. In Shadowlands they will, but right now I just don't really feel like a DK is a solid pick for any pug. Unless you need a Battle Res or a Death Grip, I would not take one, just because there's better melee out there right now. And even if these classes and specs are doing good, this is only a group of 3 DPS that you can bring. So if you're really down to the wire, crunch time here, and you want to get this 15s and time done, and you're struggling with this, comp is going to be very important for that. And DK, unfortunately, on the outside looking in. But yeah, they do, they have AMS that can be useful on some fights, like Rixa in Motherload. But other than that, I don't really feel like they have a niche for pugging right now. Demon Hunter, mostly covered already, but main thing I'll say one more time about Demon Hunter is that they're incredibly flexible. They have everything you could possibly want, and the most important thing is they have high access to damage. They're going to have very strong damage every single pack. It might not equal to Mage Combust, or something like that, but they have the best access to damage. Them and regular Hunter have the best access to damage by a mile. Those two together are more than every other class together. So this is a really important thing for pugging keys, because you want to have a consistent outflow of damage from your group, especially when you're in no communication. You know what I mean? If you're not talking or communicating in Discord or something like that, then you need to have consistent play from your DPS. Otherwise, as a tank, you're just never going to be able to get a rhythm. You're going to be constantly wondering, is this going to die fast or not? Is it safe to pull big or not? So that rhythm is very important, and I think it's established very well by having a Demon Hunter. Now next is Druid, and unfortunately you might be happy to see a Druid, or you might not be, depending on what spec they're playing. We've talked about this, and it's become a bit of a channel meme at this point, but I want to take this very serious and say that Pharaoh Druid is not a bad pick for 5-mans in a vacuum. They're just a bad pick in reality, because they don't bring a single thing that balance doesn't bring and is needed, first of all, and they're just worse than every other melee in the game. Like, yes, people will say, well, as a Pharaoh Druid, I out DPS all these other people in my group, or I do these things, but that doesn't matter. That we're talking about like the theoretical, standpoint of a Pharaoh Druid. What do they do better than any other melee, and what do they do better than Bombkin? If you personally feel like they do something better than any of those things, then feel free to disregard my opinion. But for me, I always question the Druid pick because I want to see a Bombkin in every key I do, and we'll talk about that at the end. But the problem is nobody ever takes Trents, and there's a small percentage of the time that they're feral. Now, that's kind of a problem with the Blizzard UI, and of course you can solve it by just asking the player what spec they're playing, but I hate to do that because I feel like it's like borderline bullying, and even though we engage in that on stream a bunch as a joke especially, I hate to do it to people. I hate to make them feel bad for the spec directly, but frankly, if you invite a Pharaoh Druid to your key and you're expecting a ranged DPS, it's a little rude, and I get a little upset about that. But Bombkin is actually a great pick, and we're going to have those included in what I will consider the best comp right now for me. Hunter, we already talked a lot about, but yeah, again, extremely high mobility. Having a Hunter and a Demon Hunter in every group is going to guarantee that a lot of fights, especially like Krogma or fights like that where you're having to move around a lot and deal mechanics at the same time as damage, that is obviously what Hunter excels at right now. Unfortunately, in the Pug universe, a lot of people are flavor of the month reroller Hunters, and they're just not playing the spec well at all. But I think even with that, it's still a very, very, very strong pick, and I wouldn't mind seeing a Hunter in every key I did either, as long as they're not a mega derp and like running around and getting killed by nonsense that should not even impact their play. But yeah, extremely high access to damage, above average utility and bulk, and obviously the best mobility of any range put together. So now Mage, we talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to say that I would not want to see a Mage in a 15, frankly, because you're never really going to see a Frost Mage. If it was a Frost Mage, I would take a Mage to every key I did, because Frost does bring a lot of really nice utility for Blood DK, and also just has way more consistent damage. But the problem is everybody's playing Fire because of how flashy it is right now. And that's fine. It's a great spec, especially for harder content and rating especially. But in 5-mans, especially smaller keys, lower combat times, Fire Mage just doesn't have any value. Unless you plan on pulling like 3 or 4 packs every couple minutes, then I don't see why I would ever take a Fire Mage to a 15, to the point where I'd probably exclude them. Like, I would look to not include them. And unfortunately, it's also because of the attitudes that we've seen with Fire Mages. We've seen this intermittently through other classes too, but I do feel like Fire Mage just kind of attracts this, because first of all, they're way harder to play than Hunter and Demon Hunter. And even if you play them perfectly, it's still hard to beat those classes as a mage. Of course, it's going to look like you're beating them a lot because of the insane damage on some packs, but then on the other packs, arguably you might be below that tank as a lot of times as mage. So I just don't see what their purpose in a 15 would be, because they're not going to be able to do that, and nobody ever plays Frost. So for me, if I was doing what I assume you guys are doing watching this video, I would never pick a mage. It just seems like a terrible pick. Now monk, if you look down here, you're going to see extremely few monks, but I don't necessarily understand why that is the case, because I feel like monk is the quintessential middle of the pack pick right now. I think they're an excellent pick. If you believe your class or your spec is above Windwalker, then they're very good, and if you believe they're below Windwalker, then they're not great. But monk is perfectly in the middle. They bring a solid buff to physical damage, which is always nice, especially if you have multiple melee, like Rogue and Warrior, which are pretty popular right now. And they bring Ring of Peace, which has some really good utility, especially on some affixes. And overall, they're just solid. They do good. They have, average bulk, great mobility, above average cleave, and good access to damage. So I think monk is a solid pick. Not Demon Hunter by any stands, but they're good. I would take a monk. If I saw a good monk, the thing is, not a lot of people are playing a monk, so it's actually kind of a good thing. If you see a good monk, they're really good, because they're playing a class that's kind of out of favor right now. Same with Paladin. Same could be said with Paladin. They have way better bulk. In fact, I would say that they have the best bulk in the game. It's hard to argue because Demon Hunter have so much actual self-healing and leech, but I do think if we're talking about raw defensives, Paladin obviously have the best ones, and immunity, and they have good utility as well, land hands, and immunity for the group too occasionally will save life. So Paladin's actually an excellent pick for pugging because of all that. If they actually use Ward of Glory, which another thing nobody ever does anymore is Rep Pally. If you see a Rep Pally with Ward of Glory, then he is going to actually care about your group And that is really, really valuable because sometimes the healer makes a mistake, sometimes the tank makes a mistake. You need a little bit of help from somebody who doesn't expect to give it. And if the Paladin is ready to give it, he can give a lot of it. So one way or the other, Paladin is a great pick for pugging because of their insane bulk, consistent, their ability to survive pack to pack is going to be consistent. And they're kind of like a budget fire mage in some ways. Their damage is going to be a lot less high and a lot less low, but they're going to have pretty big windows in between wings. Now with the builds people are running, it's going to be a lot less of a problem. But yeah, I do think having that kind of delete potential is powerful. Not hugely powerful in 15 like we said with Mage, but it's a good thing to have on a class with that much bulk and that much potential to help the group. Now Priest is unfortunately they're kind of on the outside looking in right now. I don't feel like Shadow Priest brings a single thing to a 15, and I don't know why I would ever bring one. Unfortunately, like I said, it's not just about, there could be good players playing Shadow Priest. And again, if you see a good player playing a Shadow Priest, they're probably, above average player compared to others playing Demon Hunter and Hunter. But still, if we're talking about just pure theory and comp, I don't see a reason to bring a Priest whatsoever, unfortunately. Nothing against Priest, I'm sure, but I just, they don't bring anything that helps the group. They don't really bring anything that makes any specific dungeon good. In Shadowlands, they'll have more value because of some changes, but for right now, if you're looking to finish 15s in time, I would avoid, like I said, I'd avoid Mage, and I also avoid Priest. It's mostly because the problem with these two classes is that they have really long interrupt CDs, and you're not, if you're pugging, you're going to have overlaps on interrupts. Let's put it this way. If you brought 3 priests instead of 3 demon hunters, the overall potential to succeed in interrupt heavy dungeons is just dramatically lower. Even if they all interrupt perfectly, it's just so much worse. So I wouldn't it's just not worth the gamble to take these long interrupt classes that don't have dramatic upsides. So then next is Rogue. Now you might have heard on the channel me say things like, I think Rogue is a wasted pick, I think Rogue is a bait pick, and then people retort saying that Rogue is one of the best, if not the best pick in the game for 26s and stuff. I'm not doing 26s. The reason that that's the case is because they have ridiculous utility that is unfortunately not optional in a lot of ways for those keys. The main thing that they bring, especially as Outlaw, and almost exclusively as Outlaw, but is that they have a lot of stuns, a lot of disrupts for mobs that are casting pesky abilities, especially mobs that can't be interrupted but can only be stunned. Rogue is very valuable with that. Also, they have Tricks and Shroud, which are incredibly valuable, especially in really high intensity levels. So I think the big thing about Rogue, though, is that if they're playing Outlaw, their damage has the potential to be very inconsistent, and I don't know if that's just the rogues being inconsistent or the class, but I've had very poor success, especially on single target, with Outlaw rogues over the last few, pretty much 3 seasons since season 2. Since they got rid of the OP-ness of Rogue in season 1, it's been all downhill from there for me with rogues. But I do believe Assassination is a strong pick, and they're a solid melee. They're a good pick one way or the other because sometimes, in Freehold, you need things like Shroud or the fact that they can go stealth and they can go do the dog. So these things are valuable, but I just don't really feel like they bring much else. Now, the reason that I feel like it's a dead pick for my comp is because as a Blood DK, I do all those things anyway, besides not the Shroud stuff, but the stunning and the disrupting of mobs. I have a single target stun, I have a single death grip, which is on a very short CD, and Gorfians, long CD, but can interrupt multiple things. So I just don't really feel like I need another player to do that. I could handle it all myself, and they're just kind of a worse hunter then at that point. What do they bring that's not, you know what I mean? Why bring a rogue over Demon Hunter or Hunter if you're not getting any value out of their utility? So now maybe if you're pugging 15s, this is different for you because you are maybe more worried about that than I am. I've figured out where I can use the death grips and the Gorfians and all this stuff to interrupt key spells. Maybe you don't have that access, you're not comfortable doing it, then Rogue becomes a really good pick. So solid pick, kind of mandatory for Tola Gore and some other dungeons in certain ways, but overall I do think they're overrated, and I think a lot of that kind of trickles down from people seeing them in the top comps, and they think that it's just a universally applicable thing. Certainly not, especially not if you're pugging 15s. And then Shaman is another one that you're not going to see a lot of, sadly. You scroll down here, only 79 Shamans. I mean, even compared to Monk, that's barely more. So I'm kind of surprised to see it. It's actually, is it the 4th most? Yeah. 4th. Warlock is lower than that. But anyway, yeah, Shaman's not a hot pick right now. I'll tell you what, though. A good Ellie Shaman is the best pick in the video game if you're playing a tank guy, in my opinion. We can go into this in a very long form, but we won't have time for it. All I'll tell you what is having a ranged interrupt that is a very short interrupt, having a ranged AoE stun, and having Earthquake, Knockdown, and Rock Elemental is insane. I'll tell you what, these things together make Ellie the #1 pick for me. I absolutely love it, but you just never see them. They just don't exist anymore. I don't know why. I guess it's harder to play, especially than Hunter. Not as flashy as Mage, but I would definitely say that they're top 3, like, you know, Hunter, Mage, top 1 and 2, and then Shaman #3 for range DPS. And I would take one to literally every key I did. If you could find a good one, they're invaluable. Problem is, once again, they might be enhanced. Now, enhanced is certainly more valuable than feral because a lot of the utility that Resto Shaman has just carries over to melee enhanced. But the problem is, it's just comparable to other melee. It's just not, it's nothing special, right? So as a Shaman, as Ellie, you have a ranged interrupt that's on a melee style CD. You have a ranged AoE stun. No other, you know, very, very few other have that. Warlock has it too, but yeah, not many other options. And then you have like big utility like the knockdown, the rock elemental, all that kind of stuff. Range slow as well. Now as enhance, you have those things too, minus the earthquake knockdown, which is one of the biggest things in the game for me. You have those things too, but you have a regular melee interrupt, so just like every other melee. You have ranged AoE stun, which doesn't matter because you're in melee. And, you know, Rock Ellie, since you don't have the Primal Elementalist talent, it's worse, it's harder to use. So, yeah, just kind of a worse pick in every way, kind of like Pharaoh Druid and Bombkin. But it's not as bad, it's just Ellie is way better in my opinion, especially because you're getting a ranged that has all of this value. Then we have Warlock, which has definitely been the black sheep of this expansion. Right now, Destro is actually really good, and Demo can be very good for keys too, but you got to be worried about Affliction Warlock. Now, we actually did a key with an Affliction Warlock a couple weeks ago, so you can look that up on the channel if you want to see it. He didn't do as bad as I thought he would, but theoretically, Affliction just has the least AoE DPS in the game right now. There's no other class that's even close, I don't believe. So, it's a sad thing, but if you ever see an Affliction Warlock, you're in for some trouble, especially if it's on a fortified week, which that key was. It's bizarre to see anybody even trying to do that. But anyway, Warlock's big problem is that they have no interrupt right now. To take an interrupt, they have to have a specific pet, which is viable if you're Destro. Demo will never do it, realistically. They'll be forced to do it, and they'll be begrudgingly doing it the whole time. And just in general, a longer interrupt. And they're just kind of lacking utility. Hellstones are very good, so that is one reason to think about a Warlock if you're pugging. If you're not confident, getting Hellstones for the group can help a lot. But I do find like in those low communication groups, nobody ever uses Hellstones, me included. A lot of times I bring a Warlock and I don't even use the Hellstones. I'm just not used to having one, so I'm never used to using them. And then finally, Warrior is actually like really popular right now, but I don't feel like they're a particularly strong pick. The thing about Warrior I feel like right now is that they do have really good access to damage, and I feel like they can output that damage really easily. I'm not actually sure how the spec works, but I never really see a Warrior do bad damage. That doesn't necessarily mean much, but I do think that there must be something going on there. So I do think if you pick a Warrior, you're going to get high damage, which frankly is probably a little bit more important than we're giving it credit for in 15s. But at the same time, they don't bring anything else but that. That's it. They have like above average bulk in certain situations, depending on how you quantify it. But yeah, their mobility, a lot of it's just going to be used in their offense, like between Heroic Leap and Charge. Very few uses of it ever get used for actual mobility, I feel like. And of course, famously, their lack of utility is horrendous. Like they actually don't have utility. Like they don't have Shockwave. All they have is, Rallying Cry or whatever. They bring a small, buff. Maybe it's useful for melee, but also they have a slow, which is, I guess good, but who doesn't have a slow? So I don't know. It's kind of it's one of those picks that you better be getting good damage out of them, because if you're not, then you're in trouble. So all of that said, that's my thoughts on every single, class and spec potentially. What do I think is the best comp? So for me personally, this is what I would consider tier 1, number 1 comp for me, okay? Me in the Blood DK slot, okay? A Holy Paladin as in the healer slot. Sorry, Sarah. A Holy Paladin in the healer slot who does damage. That's mandatory. If they don't do damage, then bring a Resto Shaman. That's the way I look at it. Basically, the reason that I want a Holy Paladin in that slot is because they're going to not need to heal me very often, and a good percentage of the dungeon that's all there's going to be to heal. Like, most globals would go to me, and if I don't need those globals, then they can do something else with those globals. What's the class that can do the most with those globals? Holy Paladin. In that order, I'd say Holy Pally, Resto Shaman, Resto Druid. Those would be the 3 classes that can do the most with globals that are not like healing me or others, okay? So, especially because Glimmer is effectively free damage and healing in a lot of ways, they're just naturally good with Blood DK. Their healing style matches up very well with Blood DK. And then in terms of 3 DPS, this is what I would say. A little controversial. Bombkin, it's balanced Druid, in case you're new. Elemental Shaman, Havoc Demon Hunter. Those would be the 3. Havoc Demon Hunter, we talked about to death. Huge, just perfect key kit. Literally everything they have is exactly what you want. And most importantly, they bring the magic debuff. So the Bombkin and the Ellie Shaman can do better. Now, Balanced Druid is a little bit looked at as poor offense right now. And I understand why, because they don't do that explosive AoE. But for me, if they actually use Solar Beam and they actually use Trance, they are an invaluable pick for pugging and keys in general. Especially on some weeks like Necrotic. It is so freaking valuable to have Trance. It's unbelievable. It makes the tank job so much easier. It allows you as a tank to be way more confident in going more offensively built instead of defensively built. And of course, it can save a wipe. That's what's most important about Ellie Shaman and Druid. They can save a wipe. If you die, if you're the tank and you die, it's usually going to be a wipe unless the pack is almost dead or the respawn is really quick. You do not need to worry. If they can use their CDs at the right time, Trents, a lot of people just use Trents on CD, so that's not ideal. But between that and Shaman, if they can use Rock Ellie and Trents at the right time, you literally don't need a tank. So that could be used in other ways too. If you overpull or something goes wrong in the pack and they use that there, it's no longer a problem for you as a tank. So those would be my picks. Like I said, Rogue, Mage, Hunter, these things are really popular right now, especially in really high keys, but I just don't feel like, mostly because of the experiences I've had with these classes, in pugging, no voice, no communication whatsoever pugs, I just don't feel like they naturally bring enough to the key for me to get much value out of it as a tank. Now, if we're not playing a DK, let's talk a little bit about tanks and healers. So right now, Resto Druid is still looked at as an amazing pick for keys, mostly because they still have access to battle res, but also because they have a really good kit overall for keys. They have a good slew of utility that can be useful in keys. I don't necessarily agree that it's very useful, but it is powerful, and it's hard to deny that. And mostly it's their healing model. It just works really well with 5-mans. Always has and probably always will. So it's a good stable pick. You're going to see a lot of Resto Druids out there. Not a bad pick at all. I just don't feel like as a Blood DK, Resto Druid synergizes well with what I do, and I certainly don't feel like they're better than a Paladin in that way. Now, non-tank Blood DK, besides them, obviously, a lot of people are playing Prot Warriors, and it's probably a safe pick. If you're not the tank, or even if you are the tank and you're looking to pick something right now, Prot Warrior is a solid pick because they can just do so much offense. They're just going to do more offense than I am as a Blood DK. It's just a fact. So that is actually really important when you're pugging, is having good offense from the 2 slots that don't expect to have good offense. That's the Paladin healer, hopefully the healer in general, and the tank. If you get 2 beast, tank, and healer DPS combos, then the keys are just going to die really quick. You're not going to have any problems. So that's pretty much what I would want to see. Besides that, again, every spec and class is viable for 15, certainly, absolutely for 15. I mean, you could say 20, 25, the list can go on and on. It's just not optimal, and that's what we're talking about in theory comparison. You have to understand what is and isn't important in this, and you'll probably have different experiences than me, but for me, I feel like the number one thing is having a good bulky group that is going to survive mistakes. That's the most important thing when you're pugging disorganized keys. Survive mistakes. Do not let full wipes occur, only let partial or single deaths happen, okay? If that happens, you will upgrade keys, guaranteed. If you do a key with no deaths, it's an upgrade. There's no way it's not. So classes that aren't great right now for that are DK. I don't feel like, you know, like in terms of like raw survival, priest, warlock, these things, they don't bring much. And even you could say the same thing about shaman, and unfortunately these things kind of keep them out. But overall, the bulkiest, obviously demon hunter, paladin, mage, hunter, and potentially rogue under many circumstances. So those are good picks for that. In terms of access to damage, another huge portion of your upgradability on the key, how much access to damage you have. Mage, absolutely tier 0 on that, the worst possible access to damage out of any spec in the game right now. If they have their damage, they're explosive, but in lower keys that you're struggling with low communication, it's just a complete waste of a pick. Do not take them. Demon hunter, hunter, even like paladin, rogue, these classes are going to have way more damage pack to pack than mage will, and it'll be way more consistent. You'll be able to learn the route. More importantly, you'll be able to learn the route and learn what you're doing well and what you're not doing well without having to worry about somebody constantly harping at you to change what you're doing to fit their needs. And then other, you know, things like utility, which classes bring the most applicable utility. For me, that's druid, shaman, balanced druid, and Ellie shaman are extremely valuable. Resto shaman also extremely valuable. Paladin has some upsides, monk has some upsides, but demon hunter, clearly tier 1, number 1. They just bring everything you'd want, especially if you're going to bring some casters, get that magic buff going. So hope this helps. A little bit of insight into how the pugging universe has unfolded for me, what I value in keys, and hope that will help you learn what you value in keys with these last few weeks of the expansion. If you need any specific help, I answer every single question. I try my best to read and answer every single question in the comments. So just leave a question. I will get back to you, and I'm happy to help in any way. So thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.